Good evening, Dr. Wei. My name is Eugene Fu and my message number is 294023. I want to do a presentation for my individual assignment. That is, I want focus a study on SOS Berhad in Malaysia performance and its determinant. Firstly, I want to introduce the background of the company. SOS Berhad is one of the telecommunication company from the telecommunication industry in Malaysia. It was established in 2005, and the company inception as a telecommunication enterprise led to the introduction of its first prepaid SIM card in 2009. Following its growth, SOS Berhad became publicly traded on Bursa Malaysia in 2011 under the brand name One XOX. The company currently promotes its mobile service, boasting a membership of over 2.5 million users. For the problem statement, the first problem faced by SOS Berhad is the pandemic COVID-19. Because the government implemented the MCO, during this period, the firm cannot be operating, so lose the operating income. After that, the primary problem of SOS Berhad is the ROA and its ROE from 2018 to 2022 still negative. This is a problem for SOS Berhad facing. For this research have three research objective and three research question. For the research objective, the first is to determine the internal or company specific factor that could have influenced SOS Berhad performance. And the secondly is to identify the external or microeconomy influence that may have impact the performance of SOS Berhad. Lastly, to examine the internal and external issue that may have impact the performance of SOS Berhad. Then for research question, the first is there any relationship between the internal factor and the performance of SOS Berhad? After that, is there any relationship between the external factor and the performance of SOS Berhad? Lastly, is there a relationship between internal and external factor and the performance of SOS Berhad? For literature review, profitability refer to a company capacity to provide a return on investment relative to its resources in comparison to an alternative investment. For this research, with the dependent variable is the ROA. The formula to calculate the ROA is using net income and the total asset. In financial performance have two things. The first is ROA and the second is ROE. For this research, we only focus on the ROA. After that, we want to see the internal and external factor to influence the dependent variable. For internal factor have four things. The first is liquidity risk. In the liquidity risk, we using the current ratio. And the credit risk have two type. The first is debt to income, and the second is the average correct period. And then the operational risk have operational ratio and the operating margin. And the last is the corporate governance index. For the external, um, can see that only the market risk, but in the market risk have more things. The first is the inflation rate, and the second is interest rate. The third is exchange rate. The fourth is unemployment rate and have GDP growth and industrial production rate. The analysis for this study, the data carried out from the annual report SOS Berhad. All data gathered for 5 years from 2018 to 2022, which is divided into dependent variable or independent variable, including internal factor and external factor. After that, I using the SPSS systems to see that the internal factor how to influence the financial performance, that is ROA. And the second, using SPSS system to see the external factor how to influence the performance of the company, The third is using SPSS to see the internal and external factor, how to affect the company performance. After using the SPSS system to run the data, the first result is descriptive statistic. For example, the mean of RA is 0.1703 and the standard deviation is 0.1684. After that, from the 13 independent variable, the mean of debt to income is smaller, which is 0.0595 and its standard deviation is 0.0706. Because we using the data is only 5 years, so the sample only 5. After that, we can see from the correlation table result, only 10 independent variables are positively correlated to the dependent variable because their p-value are less than 0.10, and only 3 independent variables are negatively correlated to RA, which is average correct period, debt to income, and interest rate. There is not significant influence on the RA because the p-value is more than 0.10. From 3 independent variables, have 2 from the credit risk, that is average correct period and the debt to income. For this slide, show that the positive correlated to influence the RA and the negative correlated to affect the RA. The positive correlated to influence the RA have 10 independent variables, which is current ratio, return on equity, operation ratio, operating margin, inflation rate, exchange rate, unemployment rate, GDP growth, industrial production rate, and the last is CG index. For negative correlated to influence RA, only 3, which is average correction period, debt to income, and interest rate. For the first model summary table is the internal factor. From 7 variable, only 3 have significant impact on the dependent variable. The adjust R square value is 0.943 and the second table is external factor. Show that out of 6 variable, only 3 variable related to XOS per half performance. The adjust R square value is 0.874 or 87.4%. Initiated strongly relationship between their variable and the company RA. Lastly, table is the internal and external factor. We can see that only 3 independent variable to affect the dependent variable, which is RA. The 3 independent variable is unemployment rate, current ratio, and the exchange rate. And the adjust R square is 0.285 or 28.5%. For the first coefficient table is internal factor. From the table, we can see that the 3 variables are not significant to influence the RA, but the operating margin is near significant to influence the RA because the p-value of operating margin is 0.101. We know that the p-value must less than 0.10 is significant to influence the RA. So the operating margin is near to significant to influence the RA. After that, for the other variable are not significant to influence the RA. For the coefficient table for external factor are not significant to influence the RA because the interest rate, unemployment rate, and GDP growth, the p-value for this are not significant because the p-value is too high or more than 0.10. For the last coefficient table, also same with the external factor because for 3 variables are not significant to influence the RA. After analysis the data, we can know the result and do the conclusion and given the recommendation for this research. The conclusion for this research, the internal factor have a greater impact on the performance of F or X per half when compared to the effect of external variable model 2 and both internal and external variable model 3. Then from this study, no independent variable significantly affect the dependent variable that is RA because they are more than 0.10. However, the operating margin is nearly 0.10. So the operating margin is the main variable affect the RA. The recommendation for this study, based on the conclusion, the operating risk has a more significant effect on the profitability of SOS Bahat, which is the RA. So the firm should implement the cost control for the operating. After that, according to the firm statement, the company should reduce the expenses. Although the revenue for SOS Bahat is more, the expenses too more. This decision affect the net income will be negative, and the net income cannot cover total liability for S per half. Because this recommendation can help the SOS per half to increase the net income and reduce the expenses. And to help the SOS per half, the RA can become positive.